We are recording the interview of Jared Shank. This interview is being conducted by Erica Carter from the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 1:41 p.m. on June 27th, 2018. How are you today?
Hey, pretty good. It's been a good day.
That is awesome. Where and when were you born?
Born April 23rd, 1984, and here in Dayton, Ohio.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Father was John Shank. He was a teacher in the Miami East School District, a little north of here. He was an Army veteran himself. My mother was Carol Shank. Her occupation was a laboratory technician with CompuNet Clinical Labs that are also around here in Dayton.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have a brother, John, and a sister, Marianne.
Did either of them serve in the military?
No, they did not.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
So before I entered the service, was straight into high school, actually. Coming through high school, probably sophomore, maybe early junior year, I think based on family background and whatnot, I really wanted to go into the military, so I was thinking about that in some way, shape, or form. I got to be really gung-ho about wanting to go to a service academy. I really wanted to go to West Point, so I was kind of hell-bent on that. Pursued getting, as part of that, you have to be admitted into the school, you have to apply, but to basically be considered, you typically have to have a congressional nomination by somebody to get into there, to even get to that point and get considered. I did receive a congressional nomination by then Congressman Dave Hobson, who was the local representative here in this area, to go, but I wasn't immediately selected to attend the academy. I think part of that involved my senior year was when 9/11 happened, so that also happened while I was in class. And if I had any shadow of a doubt if I wanted to do anything military, which I don't think I did, but had that existed, and it was pretty much wiped out, I think after that happened, I was really just, this is what I'm doing, and it's just a matter of how I get there. And with that all being said, once I got nominated, I was really close to moving along that track and wanting to go to the academy. And long story short, I got a letter back from them basically saying, you're not, we regret to inform you the letter you don't want to get, that we do not have a spot for you in the academy. I was offered a spot in their, what they call the preparatory academy, which helps build you up kind of for another year to set you up into West Point. But at that point in time, I was kind of a big military history buff too. I really felt that if this conflict was going to happen, it's going to be over quick, and I really wanted to get into the fight. So I basically just dropped everything and went straight enlisted through an Army recruiter. I was trying to decide what job I wanted to do in the Army. Very high test scores, so pretty much everything was open to me. But family history of some artillery, and then I had another close friend at that point in time, kind of a family friend who was a World War II veteran who participated in a lot of the airborne operations in World War II, and I was always really just in awe of that individual. So I wanted to be airborne artillery, which is odd, so that's what I enlisted to do. And oddly enough, at that point in time, I had absolutely no idea that the conflicts and things were going to last as long as they have. That might have changed my course and plans, but at that time I figured if I wasn't there, Johnny on the spot right then, I wasn't going to get overseas. And then obviously ended up being deployed to Afghanistan. But yeah, leading up to it, my whole high school path was really service academies until the very, very last portion, really the last month or two of my senior year when I finally got that letter saying I wasn't going to be admitted, and then it was, all right, I will go the enlisted route in the military. And there's options too for enlisted service members to get nominated and go to the academy as well. So I figured if I do this and I don't like it, then it's an easy way to just say I'm done with it. And if I do like it, then I can request through the appropriate chain of command to try to go to West Point in that manner. So ended up not requesting that. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
A few questions about some of the things you said. You said you had a strong family background. Who in your family served?
So my father served during the Vietnam era. Did not go to Vietnam, but he trained a lot of pilots that did go to Vietnam. My grandfather was World War II, pretty much. He was field artillery in World War II, actually stationed in Alaska in the Aleutian Islands, which a lot of people don't realize that there were battles in Kiska and Attu in the Aleutian Islands in World War II, and he was part of that. And then, of course, every family member pretty much from that generation, all of their siblings on both my sides, grandparents, whatnot, pretty much everybody served. So at any family event, there was often different military stories, this, veteran, this, whatever. Traced family heritage back even further. I mean, Civil War vets, even back to Revolutionary time frame. So I just felt that it was, I don't know, it's weird that I felt that it was sort of a family duty to go and do it, but at the same time, like, my brother and sister didn't. So it's interesting to see that we were obviously different individuals, and that's just how I personally felt that I needed to go and serve, because I just felt that that's what I needed to do.
Okay. How did your parents feel about your strong desire, especially at such an early age?
I don't think it became real to them until probably I was in high school, because even as a kid, I was very into everything military, always playing Army out in the yard, and I wasn't the kid who was just playing Army, I was the kid who was playing American Revolution and Spanish-American War and World War II this, or Pacific Theater this, European theater, like very specific playing in the backyard. So I don't think it was until, getting into high school, when you get to that age, they started hearing that. And I don't know if either one of them were, they weren't against it by any means. But they did kind of give me that conversation like, hey, if you want to go to college, we'll, straight out of high school, we're willing to help you pay for that and do whatever we need to do type of thing. But if you want to do the Army, that's fine. I think my dad, even though he was drafted, I think he really appreciated his time in the military, the experience he had. So I think he was kind of like, well, I liked that, maybe that's fine for you. And I don't think it really hit them much until I deployed overseas and started telling them, things that were going on and getting into combat and stuff like that, that I remember my father writing something like, I really wish we would have just paid for you to go to college, type of thing. And you don't think about that as a kid. You don't think about your parents' reactions. But now, like, I have 2 sons now that are both very, very young, and I never thought about that, like what stress that you put on your parents because you're just a kid. You want to go do what you want to go do, and you don't think about that. So,
okay. So Army, you knew no other branch, Army.
At that point in time, I was talking to the Army and the Marines, and I don't really know what caused me to choose one or the other. Family and most friends' background was Army, and I really liked, for whatever reason, I really liked West Point better than I did Annapolis, which was the Naval Academy. And I think somewhere I just kind of said, no, I'm not interested in doing the Marine route. I want to do the Army route. And there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason to that. It's just that's what was there, and decided to pick them.
Okay. So Dad said, I had a good time, and I learned a lot in training. Tell me about your training, starting with basic. What? Oh my.
So I did my basic training. All of my work was actually called One Station Unit Training, OSUT training. That was field artillery, so I did my basic training at Fort Sill, and then as soon as it was over, you stayed right there where you were and did your artillery school.
You signed your contract, and when you signed it, I'm going to do this job.
Yep, I signed it and picked artillery. I picked airborne artillery, so you had to get special qualifications or an additional medical evaluation to say you're qualified to be airborne, but that also was contingent upon you have to pass the school and do everything too, otherwise the Army could kind of still put you wherever they needed. So kind of going into basic, I wouldn't say I went in blind, just because, again, I was a big military history buff, I knew it was going to suck. No rhyme or reason to it. I knew it was going to be bad. But, it's still something you're apprehensive about. And one of my biggest memories from basic wasn't even the drill sergeants or any of that type of stuff. It was actually right immediately after we got there, and probably maybe a day or two, they went through the whole, whatever you want to call it, the big line that you're in for all your shots and all that stuff, and everybody gets their hair cut. And I remember doing that, not thinking about it, and it wasn't until later that day we went to the chow hall to eat dinner, I think. And the chow hall there at Fort Sill, when you walked in, on that side, had this giant mirror, full body mirror that went, 10, 15 feet into the chow hall. And I remember after all that happened, turning and looking and kind of feeling like a vampire, like I didn't see myself in the mirror. I remember specifically looking at the mirror and being like, where am I? Because I always had longer hair than I have now, and whatnot, and I just remember looking like, where am I? And I remember having to move my hand to see this person there raise their hand and thinking, holy crap, like I'd never seen myself with a shaved head, obviously. And it was just like how different I looked between having that and then the big, I have contacts in right now, but it had glasses. So you had the great big brown glasses on as well. So just between that and having the head shaved, I just remember thinking, holy crap, like that's me now. This is what I'm doing. And that was kind of that first realization that this is going to change me. This is changing everything about who I was. As far as the rest of it, you know, it's kind of your standard stories about basic training. There's a lot of things that I probably can't repeat. Crazy instances, you know, doing the gas chamber, obviously a very memorable event, trying to do that, and remember thinking, you know, they get you in there and the drill sergeants tell you, all right, when you take off your mask, you know, recite your name, your social, and say your MOS or hometown, whatever it was at that point in time. And everybody's always kind of cocky, like, it can't be that bad, I can do this. And I remember thinking, all right, we're just going to hold my breath and I'm going to rattle all this stuff off and I'm going to be the one who actually gets through everything. And no, it doesn't happen. I just remember, you know, pulling off that mask and being like, saying my name, and I think I might have got through my last name before, like, all that stuff is just burning your eyes, draining, and you just feel everything. But at the same time, it's preparing you for what that situation could be like, and, you know, teaching you that there is a very important reason why they're trying to get you to put on your gas mask so quick. And then, of course, you know, going through marksmanship training and all that I thought was fun. I was very into the shooting sports and whatnot growing up, so I felt like I was fairly proficient. And then when I got there, and that was the first time I'd ever shot an M16, which I thought was kind of a joke because there's no recoil like whatsoever with this compared to other, you know, things that I had shot here at home. And I remember even being at the rifle range thinking I did something wrong because I was laying there shooting targets, and the drill sergeant came over and kicked me really hard in the foot. And I thought, oh God, what did I do? And I just remember looking back and and he said something like, Shank, I think you might qualify expert or something like that, and just walked off. You know, it's kind of weird. And I think we had 4 people total with both of our batteries that went through basic training there that qualified expert, and I was one of those individuals, so I was really proud of that fact. And then, of course, as soon as basic's over, they kind of pat you on the back, and then with it being 1 station unit training, it's, all right, you're done with that, but we still, you know, we still own you. Now you're going to go to the artillery school. So that was the first, obviously, the first taste of anything field artillery related. So we got to see, you know, all these different types of howitzer systems they'd used really since Vietnam, and trained on all different types of artillery. I was going into what's called towed artillery, T-O-W-E-D, towed behind something. So a light unit, because they knew I was going to be going to airborne school, and that's what the airborne units use. But you do that training as part of your advanced individual training, but then you also train on some of the heavy artillery and like the tracked self-propelled howitzers as well, just to be a little bit familiar with it. So it was definitely impressive to be able to see and be behind, you know, an 105 millimeter howitzer or 155 millimeter howitzer going off. And really, it's not like you get to see the explosion that you're talking about something miles away, you know, big boom, you don't really get to see anything. It's just the forward observers telling you that. So it was really, really good. And then I remember thinking too, like I was just impressed with the way they did a lot of the training there at Fort Sill, and going into details on how everything affects artillery rounds. Like even though I had read a lot about the military and all these different things, I never knew what went on behind the scenes, like in an artillery crew. So to be able to hear that, okay, here's this artillery round, it weighs a certain weight. That has to be factored into how it's shot and fired towards a position. It also has all these different powder charges with it. Those powder charges dictate how far it can go or how short it can go. The temperature of those powder charges can dictate how far and how short it goes. And then they got into, you know, weather conditions, altitude conditions, all this type of stuff that literally affect every little minute detail of an artillery round that you don't think about. You just think, you know, things you watch growing up, you see everybody just throwing an artillery round in a tube or, G.I. Joe and that stuff. It's, they don't talk about any of that stuff. And it's like, once you start realizing this, we have to be constantly reporting what's the temperature of all this stuff, what altitude are we at, what's all this, because somebody is doing all the calculations to make sure that round hits where it's supposed to hit. And I just was kind of blown away at that. I was like, holy cow, like I didn't realize all this stuff went into just a simple, artillery piece. So that's, pretty much wraps up the basic in AIT, and then straight from there I went to airborne school.
Okay. How long was AIT and basic?
Gosh, I don't remember now.
Okay.
I want to say 12, 14 weeks, something like that total. I can't remember. I can't remember right now. It was, date-wise, it was September 16th through early January. So whatever that equates to is when I graduated and then went to airborne school.
And where was airborne school?
Airborne school was at Fort Benning, which is in Georgia. And that was definitely a very difficult school, but I was glad I went to it when I did, because coming out of basic training, in some ways I think you have a little bit of an advantage in the sense that the Army has torn you down and you are fairly in good physical shape. Because other people that were there attending airborne school that were from other units who had been in the Army, say, for 10 years or whatever, and had just now gotten a slot and got into airborne school, I think they had a harder time adjusting to some of the physical demands of it because they weren't doing such a rigorous regimen that somebody does who just comes straight out of basic training. But that was an interesting school because I went there with a class of, it was approximately about 400 people, and I think only about half or so actually graduated. Outside of each of the barracks, there was large volumes of rocks spread out, so they would always tell everybody, form up on the rocks. And each night, every single day in airborne school, you would form up on the rocks, and they would always say, bow your heads. And everybody bow your head, close your eyes. And it was, if anybody wants to leave or is done, leave now. And every single day, you would always hear footsteps through the gravel, and you just think, who is this? And occasionally you would lift your head up and it'd be the person one or two down from you or whatever that just said, no, I'm done with this, I can't do it, and leaving. So I think every day that you succeeded and made it through, I think you felt that much more pride and kind of esprit de corps for that. And then when we got to the last week that was there, which is jump week, where you actually do your 5 jumps, there were still people leaving after that, which was surprising. But that was definitely, that's where reality really hits, because now you've done all this training, but that's the first time you're ever actually in the airplane itself, taking off and flying and looking around like, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to jump out of a plane? Like, this is going to be crazy. And it was interesting because with airborne school, it is one of the schools that the other branches can send people to. So like the Air Force, the parajumpers and whatnot, and Navy, like even the Navy SEALs and other special forces groups, their people still have to become airborne qualified. So even if they pass those schools, they generally then will go to airborne school, get that qualification, and go home. So it was interesting to be able to sit there and be like, man, there's a Marine recon guy, there's 2 Navy SEALs sitting across from here, and then the mostly rest, Army guys, and a lot of us are basic training, but there's a few officers and people too who have been in the Army a long time, and everybody is pretty much just white as a sheet looking around like, oh, yeah, now we actually have to do this. So that was a very surreal moment, but at the same time, I don't know, you went through so much training that it was really muscle memory at that point. So, you stand up, hook up, and you're holding your static line, you're getting ready to jump out the door. And I was somebody, oddly enough, who was always fairly afraid of heights. But for some reason, being in that airplane at that height, which for most of airborne school, I think we were jumping typically about 1,500 feet. They give you more of a buffer because you're learning, whereas once you get to your unit, your location, I think we would traditionally jump about 800 feet. So different. But at that distance, it's kind of like you don't comprehend that you're up on something, like looking down. It's like it didn't trigger for me as much, so I would just go run, jump out the door. But, the first time experiencing that was just amazing. The sheer peacefulness of just floating in the air, not hearing anything, just nothingness and just floating. And then, of course, you're trained so rigorously about how to land. Like, my first landing in airborne school was probably the best landing I ever had throughout my whole career, because you're literally the whole time you're going down, you're going over all that stuff in your head. This is exactly what I need to do. And as you do it more, I think you get a little bit cocky and think, I've done this, it'll be fine. But that first one, I just remember hitting, rolling, everything went so perfect, picked up the chute, got it there, and I just felt like I could run through a brick wall. Like there was nothing in the world that could ever hold me back because I just jumped out of a plane and did all this stuff. So I was very happy to get done with that, graduate, get my jump wings. And at that point in time, I think I came home for 2 weeks of hometown recruiting is what they called it then, where you could come home to your local Army recruiting office, basically help them recruit for a couple weeks, and then you went to your duty station. So that's what I did, completed the school, came home, did 2 weeks of kind of going out and trying to recruit for the Army, and then went to my duty station, which was at Fort Bragg.
Okay. Fort Bragg. Here we go. I
Huh.
have a question. How had you adjusted so far to military life, and did you think it was what you had imagined all those years?
I think for the most part, it was what I imagined, and I think I adjusted fairly well. I wasn't the type of kid who was always getting into trouble. I very much always had a respect for authority. I mean, that was instilled in me, and probably somewhat because my dad had been Army himself too. But you know, I grew up out in a rural area out in the country, and that's just how people were raised. So, you know, having to respect authority, whether it be officers or the drill sergeants or NCOs, non-commissioned officers above me, that really wasn't anything terribly new to adjust to. It was harder to probably adjust to some of the things you would do in basic training that had no rhyme or reason to them, type of thing. Like, wow, I didn't realize they played so many mental games on you. Like, I remember one big field out at Fort Sill in the fall, which is when I was there, was just covered in leaves, and they needed it raked, and they brought a whole bunch of us out there, and we were standing there, and the drill sergeants were like, all right, privates, rake this, rake this field, and we're all standing there like, what do you mean, rake this field? And he's like, rake the field, and we're like, can you give us some rakes, drill sergeant? And I just remember he specifically went like this, and he went, God gave you 2 rakes, and everybody just looked at each other and was like, yep, this is what we're in for now. So we all literally went out there and just raking up this stuff. Made no sense. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. And it's, similar kind of things when you get to your unit, some of the different trash details and things that they would put you on. You don't think about that, as part of the military. Again, everything's very kind of romanticized in books and shows and even cartoons like G.I. Joe. They don't show G.I. Joes out there, cleaning a barracks floor and buffing it and mopping things and all these other things that you're doing. You think, oh, I'm going to be put in this uniform, I'm going to be artillery, I'm going to be with that artillery piece all day long learning everything, that's it. It's like, no, there's a whole bunch more to it. So I think that was probably the area that I wasn't expecting as much of all this other stuff that you had to do that went along with the military.
Okay. First duty station, we're doing our cleaning, what happens next, so to speak? You report, how long are you there?
So I reported, I think by this time after the hometown recruiting, I think it was the very beginning of February of 2003, reported to Fort Bragg and their replacement battalion, and then got assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 319th Airborne Field Artillery Regiment, which is where I was at my whole career. So initially I was in the headquarters battalion, because when I arrived there, the unit was actually deployed to Afghanistan at that point in time. So we were just kind of replacements sitting there at base waiting for them to get back. Then they got back. Once they were back, I was assigned into Charlie Battery, which is who I deployed with to Afghanistan when the unit went the next time. So the next time was 2005. So it was about 2 years between when the unit deployed the first time and the next time. So got there, and it was an interesting time because right when I got there, everything was still up in the air. The Iraq invasion was about ready to kick off. In the military, in some ways, it's almost worse than in the civilian world in the sense that there's so many rumors and things flying everywhere. Oh, we're getting deployed, we're getting shipped out here, all these things going on. And at that point in time, too, that was largely before the average Joe had cell phones like we do now. So I didn't really have a good way to contact my parents. I mean, I actually used a payphone outside the barracks whenever I wanted to call them. So that kind of dates it, too, a little bit. But that kicked off. I hadn't got to talk with them for a couple weeks, and I remember they announced the invasions. They talked about the different units, and of course, as soon as they say anything about the 82nd Airborne, which is the division I was in, potentially being deployed. I think family and everybody was like, holy crap, we haven't heard from them, what's going on? All this is happening. And then I remember finally, being able to call them and be like, hey, it's not our, brigade or anything that's deploying. They're still overseas right now getting back, so I'm okay for a little while. But yeah, it was an interesting time to be there because there was so much going on around the world in Iraq and Afghanistan, literally just kicking off, that the training, everything was just constantly changing and being updated by what comments and things were coming out of those countries and the things soldiers were reacting to. So it was interesting.
Okay. You deployed.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that?
So deployed as part of OEF 6, which that deployment for me was Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, that's what that stands for. Deployed in April of 2005 and got back in March of 2006. So a little shy of a year. But we trained up a few months beforehand. What was interesting about that deployment is in the 82nd, we're generally a light-towed artillery unit, which is M119 howitzers, which shoot 105 millimeter rounds. Easy to shoot, move, and communicate. That's kind of artillery's motto. You need to be able to shoot, move, and get out of there as quick as you can. But the unit we were replacing in Afghanistan was from the 25th Infantry Division out of Hawaii, and they were being deactivated. And they had 155 millimeter towed howitzers, the M1908, which was a different howitzer system. And because they were being deactivated, they decided that everything was just being left in country, so that as the next artillery unit deployed, they didn't have to take their howitzers with them. They could just show up and use that stuff in place. But because of that, we then had to do some fairly rigorous training to get caught up to speed on a whole new howitzer system that we weren't trained on. So we were really the first people in the 82nd to be trained and certified on the M1908 155 millimeter howitzer, because we'd never had that capability before. And I think that was interesting too for the infantry, because artillery, you're generally firing in support of the infantry, and they're used to having certain limitations of this is how far a 105 millimeter can shoot, this is what we can expect, and then they had to completely retrain and readjust. And I think they were pretty happy that, hey, our range has now been dramatically extended in how we can support you. So that was a big change, and that was before we got there. And I just remember packing up everything, and it's like kind of like going on a camping trip. I feel like you're always talking in your head, like, what have I forgotten? What have I forgot? What do I need? And I was just going over everything in my head, packing as much stuff as I could. I was really paranoid about different things breaking, like with my weapon. There really wasn't a whole lot of extra stuff available at the unit for the weapon. So I remember getting on, I think it was even Amazon at that time, and buying some different broken shell extractors and things for my AR or the M16, because I was so nervous that something was going to happen when I was overseas. Same thing with me being somebody who wore contacts and having the glasses and stuff. Like, I was really, really paranoid about that. Like, I just had horrible, visions of myself being in combat, my glasses breaking. Oh my God, now I'm practically blind and I can't do anything. So I had like so many pairs of glasses made up, extra inserts made for like the gas masks. They had special inserts for glasses in those. I took a whole bunch of I took everything I could possibly put in there because I was, again, uber paranoid about that. And I just, wanted to have everything ready to go. So, deployed, had, I don't know, an ungodly amount of flight time to get overseas. We stopped all these different places to refuel and whatnot. Luckily, on the trip over, we were mostly on commercial planes.
I was going to ask, what were you flying on?
Yeah, most of the time it was commercial, surprisingly. We flew commercial, I think it was from out of Fort Bragg. I think we flew to Shannon, Ireland. Then from Shannon, I think we went to maybe Incirlik Air Base in Turkey just to refuel. And then from there to, I forget where we stopped the very first time, if it was Kuwait or Kyrgyzstan. I think it might have been, I think it was Kyrgyzstan. And then we basically switched planes at that point to go from a civilian plane to a C-130. And a C-130 we were all very comfortable with as as paratroopers, because that's what we jumped out of all the time. But to have all that gear with you, it was even worse than being on a plane that you're jumping out of, because everybody was just packed in there and shoving bags down in between the rows, and I just remember sitting, you're sitting really tight across from everybody, and any spots where there was any holes, you would sit a sit a duffel bag or a rucksack or whatever, and somebody in the back would come walking down everybody's knees and jump up and down until that got smushed down in there, and that was essentially it. So you literally could pretty much not even get up and move. So once we actually landed in Afghanistan, it was actually great because the back door could open up and the first couple people could actually stand up, and then as they stood up, kind of trickled back to everybody else, which at that point in time, all that heat then kind of rolled into everything, and you were really kind of realizing, oh, hey, I'm here now. This is real. So that was kind of the first overall experience, and then just walking off that plane and just looking around and seeing, this is where I'm going to be for the next, at that point in time, they didn't tell you, sorry, how long you were going to be deployed. So we had no idea if this was going to be a year, which was pretty typical, but that time they were really starting to ramp up 18-month deployment, so we had no idea if it was going to be a year or 18 months. So then we just got, ushered out to a bunch of temporary tents that were kind of set up, put all our equipment there, and then we went down, I think shortly after that, to start talking with the 25th ID people on their howitzers to just get a feel for what was going on. At that point in time, we kind of met them, and they were, as a unit, we went through and talked with a lot of them, and they were kind of, I think, a little bit disappointed in their experience because they were saying, we've been here a lot, and they're like, you're never going to get to shoot. Like, I mean, I know it sounds weird, but they were just saying, you're never going to get to shoot these howitzers. Like, we hardly ever get to do anything. Like, everything has to go through so much bureaucracy and tape and all this and that. They were just like, it's so boring. So we were all kind of like, oh man, this doesn't sound good. But we didn't know what to, what to expect. At that time, all the news and everything was coming out of Iraq. It was still very much a fresh war over there. Afghanistan was very quiet at that point in time. But we got there fairly quickly. Within 3 days, we had taken over all that equipment, signed it all over from 25th ID, and did our first rotation on the howitzer. And it was probably for the best that first real day on the howitzers and manning all that stuff, April 19th of 2005, was the first time that we took incoming rocket fire. So we had incoming, I believe they were 122 millimeter old Russian rockets that came in that day, which was, again, the very first day on the gun. And everything, I think, was in the right place at the right time for this to be successful, meaning that those rockets came in, the radar that we had on base that can help pick up incoming things to give you a spot to fire on was pointed in the exact right spot, picked up those rockets, they got clearance, they came back to us, gave us the round, the fire missions to fire, and we engaged the enemy out there, and found out that we've actually killed this whole new, basically a whole new graduating training class of Taliban out there that were teaching them how to fire rockets, essentially. But I think because of that, I'm glad things happened the way they did, because even though it was a crazy event, it re-solidified why you were there. It wasn't, after hearing all them talking and grumbling, it was like, oh man, am I going to sit here for a year and not do anything except stare at these rocks on the ground? And then to have that happen, it's like, yes, there's people here. And for me personally, I mean, obviously that was the first time that anything like that had happened, somebody trying to kill me type of thing. And I just remember being so overwhelmed with emotion and adrenaline, and initially it was just sheer anger. Just thinking, I'm so ticked off, I've never done anything to hurt anybody, and I just arrived here and now you're shooting at me type of thing. How can this even happen? And at that point in time, you really are thinking about yourself, I think, as the individual, how is this possible? You don't think about it from the 50,000 foot perspective about what's going on between all the countries and everything. It's at that point, your rubber meets the road, boots on the ground type of thing. And I think that kind of went away after a few minutes of this engagement going on. And after that was over, I just remember taking off my helmet and sitting down and just like tears running down my face, and it wasn't because I was crying. It was just that down from the adrenaline, because this was a good, I'd have to look it up. I kept a good diary, but it was a good 4 or 6 hour engagement where basically we're firing back and forth as we got new targets, firing new rounds and all this. So you are intense that entire way. And then once it's finally all clear and they let that down, it's kind of like you can flip that switch then and say, all right, I can take a break for a little bit type of thing. And when that happens, it's just, that's the first time in my life I had anything like that happen. And just to feel that adrenaline kind of leave you, and it was just like, holy crap. I just remember taking that off and sitting down and being like, is this whole year going to, it went from the opposite, like we're not going to do anything, to like, holy crap, is this whole year going to be what I just experienced? If so, I don't know if I can do it. Just craziness. So that kind of set the tone for the deployment. And I think once we took over, we being the 82nd there as a division, taking the leadership, our base got really aggressive with attacking the Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces there. So much so that some of the first people that our infantry units captured said they were surprised because the previous people that were there never dismounted from their Humvees to come after them. And our infantry guys were aggressive, to say the least. So they were kind of shocked that this was happening. Like, hey, this is not what we've been expecting from the previous Army units that were there. So I think we really showed them that we meant business as we were being there. And as time went on with everything, I mean, we were doing fire missions all the time, whether it be in direct support of the infantry or firing illumination for support of the infantry or special forces elements, whatever that were out there moving around that needed some fire support. Significant amounts of fire missions. So much so that like I kind of refer to that deployment in that time in Afghanistan as this was really an artillery war at that point in time, whereas Iraq was more of that infantry building to building type war, and Afghanistan was just constant air support and artillery support at that point in time. So we were definitely getting kind of used and abused, which was good. I mean, that's what we're there for. So it was nice to have that validity of like, I'm here to do this job and this is what I'm doing.
Okay. Seems, I feel the adrenaline just sitting here. Okay, so on a day-to-day basis, daily routine, can you walk me through that?
So usually you had, we would call it like a hot, we'd call it hot tube and cold tube. So generically speaking, you would refer to your howitzer as a hot tube or a cold tube, whatever. And that meant generally if you were, assigned to hot tube, you were actively sitting on that howitzer waiting for a call to go off, essentially. You were like the 911 response people, basically, just sitting there. If you were a cold tube, it basically meant you didn't have to sit on your gun. You could be back in your tent with the understanding that if something happens, you need to get your butt out to the gun. So that's kind of always what it was, regardless whether you were on or off. If you got attacked, guess what? You had to go to the guns. There was bunkers on bases and stuff for all the other soldiers. You could go run into those during these attacks. But the artillery folks, we couldn't do that because you had to be the ones out there firing back. You were the sole defenses of the base. So it was generally done in rotations of, I think we started off, if I remember correctly, in 8-hour shifts. But about halfway through the deployment, a couple of our gun sections had to go to a different base. So that removed resources, and then at that point in time, I think we were doing day on, day off, basically. But again, if it was your day off and something happened, you still had to go run out and deal with everything. So it really wasn't a day off. And a day off in Afghanistan is not a day off in Dayton, Ohio. You were still doing everything military. It's just you didn't have to be physically sitting at your howitzer. So you were doing something else on the base. So that's kind of just how generically everything worked. And then I mentioned some of the stuff that went on during basic training that we had to learn regarding artillery. And obviously, where we were, they knew the altitude because we were kind of stationary there. But we had to be updating them. I forget what it was now. Every half hour, we'd be calling our fire direction folks to give them updates on what the powder temperature was. So we had these thermometers that were stuck in the powders that went with all of our rounds and all that type of stuff, just so they could constantly be updating their little algorithms to say this is the new powder temperature. So hey, it went up 5 degrees, so that's going to go an extra kilometer or whatever. If we all those adjustments were constantly being made. So Just the kind of that was really the average routine. Always had to be ready to do whatever needed to be done, and if the base was getting attacked by something, which usually it was mortars, mortar fire, or rocket fire, you basically had to run and get to the guns to be able to try to shoot back. So that was kind of the overall daily routine. And like I said, I don't think that's what we fully expected, but at the same time, I think it was good because it gave us a sense of purpose.
2 questions, really quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
What was the hottest day that you had there? Do you remember?
The hottest day, I don't know if it's entirely accurate, because knowing now what I necessarily didn't know then, more science, the thermometer on the tops of the sandbags, I think, hit 138. But that was because it was actually in, I think, the sun. I think there was a little bit of reflectivity there going on into the thermometer, and kind of a heat box, making it a little hotter than it probably actually was. But yeah, well into the hundreds. And what was weird about Afghanistan is a lot of times at night, and I'm sure it was probably similar in Iraq, even if it dropped down in temperature, even if it was still in the 80s, it felt cold. I mean, you just felt like you were freezing to death after 120 or plus. And then the times we did go out on maneuvers, like if you went up into the mountains, a lot of people don't think about it, but Afghanistan is attached to part of the Hindu Kush Mountains, which is the chain that Everest is in. So it's like if you go up on some of those peaks, you might be going from something that's 120 down here to, almost 0 up on top of some of these mountains that people had to operate on. So massive temperature changes, very different. And in the wintertime, it was, same thing, but just cold, just nothing, nothing but cold everywhere. And then you'd often see snow everywhere because we were surrounded by mountains around our base. We were kind of down in a valley. Just wake up and everything would be covered with snow and whatnot. And it's like, man, you don't think about that as Afghanistan, that there's snow there. But they certainly have plenty of snow and cold weather.
It sounds like I'm from California. You would have adjusted much
Yeah.
faster than I would have. It would have been crazy for me. What was your favorite? You had to transfer and learn the new howitzer.
Mm-hmm.
Which one was your favorite? Which one did you enjoy more?
I don't know, that's actually a pretty tough question. I really liked the M119, the 105 millimeter the light howitzer, a lot, just because it was so small. You could move it around so fast, hook it up to a Humvee, do whatever you needed to do. But the M198, the 155 millimeter that we were on overseas, it had to be hooked up to an LMTV, a fairly large kind of truck vehicle, to be able to be towed around. But the sheer differences in the range and the kill radius and whatnot of 155 millimeter versus 105 millimeter, I'd probably lean a little bit more towards the 198 being my favorite. Probably had more maintenance involved with it than the 119er, but at the end of the day, I think you got more bang for your buck out of that howitzer.
Thank you. Relationships. How did you maintain your communication with the folks at home while you were deployed? And did you make any friends or any close comrades while you were deployed?
So maintaining stuff while deployed was kind of hit or miss. It was always using phones, and at that point in time, some computers as well. But computers on the internet in Afghanistan, they were all done by contractors, and even though it was supposed to be, this fast internet connection, it was practically like using dial-up at that point. I remember, watching web pages physically load down the screen, and you're sitting there like, I've only got a 10-minute window to use this, and you're like, trying to do something, and you're just watching this like, oh my God, this is taking forever, type of thing. And phones were always kind of hit or miss because sometimes, very rarely, you might have a really good connection with home and could talk like you normally could talk. But most of the time, there was actually a bad connection, and it was a delay. So often I'd call home and I'd be like, hello, and then it'd be 4 or 5 seconds later I'd hear, hello. It would echo through the phone essentially. And then I would always try to say as fast as I could, hey, I'm on a delay, talk, and then, pause for a couple seconds, and that way we're not talking over each other type of thing. But relationships, is just trying to email, call, write letters, do whatever I could at that point in time. I had actually formed a lot of really good relationships with friends here at Wright State, actually, at that point in time. I had no idea where I wanted to go. But while I was in the Army, a lot of folks from my high school came to Wright State. And while I was in various times home on leave and whatnot, I'd come visit them, hang out with them. And a couple times they actually took me around to classes. And I sat in a few classes and I'd go up and say something to the instructor or whatever. And they were all, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if they'd let me do it, but they were all like, oh yeah, just go sit back there, whatever. So I got to see what some of those classes were like and, have a really good relationship with people here. So that's really what drew me back to Wright State after I was done, is because I was like, man, all those faculty members were really nice. They let me sit there, all my friends. I've never heard any of them really complain about the school, other than your typical, I don't want to do this paper type of thing. They weren't complaining about services or anything like that. So that really solidified like why I wanted to eventually come to Wright State. But yeah, those relationships, I'm still friends with a lot of those folks, and they introduced me to other people that I had never met here. And I'm still friends with most of those folks, and it was just a matter of, again, calling people on the phone, emailing, whatever I could to communicate with them.
All right, so we're done with deployment. We head home. What kind of welcome did you get when you got home?
So the welcome was pretty much it was a standard military thing because we landed at Fort Bragg once we finally got back. So it's like you go back to a military base. So it's not like, old school videos where you see ticker tape parades and all this stuff. It was just wives, significant others, whomever that wanted to get back with their spouse. So there's really only a handful of, signs saying, oh, welcome home and all that type of stuff. And that's kind of to be expected because we just kind of marched in, did it, and then I think quickly they're like, hey, we just had this successful deployment. Officers were trying to get through that as quick as they could because they wanted family to get back together. So it was kind of like, yeah, all right, now's the time. I forget what they said, all right, go hug your soldier or whatever, and like all these family members and stuff came. I actually was a little bit different in telling my parents, like, don't worry about trying to come on base and like be there for the welcome back. Like they were there, but not at that actual facility. So as soon as we got back to the unit, like I called them and then I went off base and saw them and whatnot, because I didn't want them to have to deal with all that type of stuff. And I don't know if that was just me or just trying to be the logistics planning person, like don't worry about all that traffic and all the mess, like just stay off base and I'll come to you type of thing. Or if I wanted some time to decompress, I don't know what it was. So anyway, that all went really well. Came back and it was different. It was nice being back on Fort Bragg, and it's like you had a whole different mindset now, because now that we were back as a unit, like we were all combat veterans, but before that, everybody in the unit, you sort of always looked up to those people who had, combat time, the combat patch on their shoulder, like they were the ones who had been somewhere and done something. So now we kind of took on that role, and that was different, but it was at the same time, that was something I wanted out of my military career. So I was very proud of the fact that I had just served and came back. So it's good.
So if I'm following along, you're at about year 3.5 or 4.
It's three and a half. So ironically, I didn't mention too, I was supposed to get out of the military near the fall of 2005. However, compliments of the government, I was stop-lossed, which is something that the military used to do to basically say, hey, this unit's deploying, we need everybody that is currently in that unit. If anybody is slated to be getting out, guess what, you're not getting out until the Army says you're getting out. So that's what happened to me. I was planning to come to Wright State fall of 2005 and had to put that on hold because I was stop-lost. I had to serve, essentially, it was close to 8 months extra in the military than I was supposed to serve because of the deployment. But again, if I had to be stop-lost, I know people got stop-lost that actually stayed stateside, which I can't imagine because that would be horrible. I always kind of told myself I'm being stop-lost because the unit needs people, we're deploying and we're going to be in combat. So I didn't let it bother me, like, and I remember joking with people like when that date came in the fall overseas, but like, hey guys, I'm supposed to be done today type of thing. And it's like, oh, hey, congrats, but you're stuck here in Afghanistan. So that's just how it was. But I made the best of it. I continued on, got promoted. I came out as an E5, an NCO, so I was very proud of that fact too. So, and I don't know if I had actually gotten out when I was supposed to get out. I don't know if I would have achieved that in that time frame. So it was good. I think it helped. And it gave me more time, too, to plan what I wanted to do once I was out of the service.
Okay. We're out of the service. Woo, we made it. How did you readjust?
I'll say generically overall, I think I did pretty well because I had the benefit of having a pretty good network of friends here, and I wanted to see them as soon as I was home and running around. But there was definitely some things that hung over a little bit from the military. So I remember, where I grew up again, out in the country. One of the first days I was home, I remember laying in my bed, and just too, as a side note, I actually got out a little bit faster because I was stop lost. I kind of went to the officers and said, hey, I've got an acceptance letter at Wright State. I wanted to waive there's a 90-day period that you're typically sitting at base before you can do anything. I had that waived, so I actually got out in May of 2006, which I think it was supposed to have been like August time frame or something, but I had that waived. So basically, I got back in country mid-March in America here, and then by May 1st, that was the date I was leaving. So it was really only a month and something to essentially get my stuff together and exit the military. But I remember being at home, and it was a really nice spring day, whatever, put up the windows, and I remember laying there in my bed and just thinking, oh, this is amazing, and I kind of, dozed off a little bit, and I remember some car went by, and again, you're out in the country, there's a lot of beater vehicles out there, and this car went by, and the engine backfired, whatever, and made this really loud, just boom, right outside the house on the road, and I remember just jumping out of bed and looking all around, and even though I'm seeing my room, it's like you're seeing your tent in Afghanistan, and I remember just scrambling around like because part of that too is like once you got up overseas, you'd always grab your M4, your weapon, and then you go run to the howitzer. Like I remember getting up and being like, oh my God, where's my M4? Like I can't find my weapon. And then it took, probably a good 30, 40 seconds before it's like things started kind of refading back into this is a bed, this is a room, this is the little TV, this is my room, this is Ohio type of thing. And, instances like that I found interesting because, again, growing up, reading all this stuff, always seeing how flashbacks are portrayed in movies and things, and it was always kind of like, there's no way that these guys could, be operating normal and just all of a sudden it's like somebody flips a switch. And it wasn't until that kind of happened I was just kind of like, holy crap, like that's what just happened like that, and it happened to me. Like that kind of just boggled my brain. I was like, oh my God. And then I remember the first couple months too, it was a little bit hard, friends wanting to go to here, the Fairfield Commons Mall, two-story mall. It was a little bit hard walking around on the bottom story and having people above me constantly and seeing people lean over and yell at their family or friend, whatever. That definitely had me on edge a little bit. And even when I started here at Wright State, it was kind of nervous. Anytime you'd see maintenance or people on top of buildings on campus, always felt kind of weird and awkward, like, this needs to be called into somebody, hey, there's people up here or whatever type of thing. But that went by, I think once I started classes and was really getting back into academics, I think a lot of that started fading. It wasn't so weird. I still liked sitting, towards, a corner of a classroom or something like that versus somewhere, else where I couldn't see people coming in type of thing. But I think for the most part, it was a fairly quick transition, but there was definitely some issues. And even now, there's still occasionally one of the things that kind of, I won't say it's a full-blown trigger, but Afghanistan, where we were, was nothing but rocks. I mean, just everywhere. It's not like there was any grass. It was just rocks. And you get very used to walking on that and hearing everything. So even now, it's interesting sometimes when I'll be out on a hiking trail or something like that, and it's all rocks. And it's like there's times where I can just close my eyes and you just hear that noise of your feet slipping through the gravel and taking step after step, that it's just like, again, it's like you flip that switch and instantaneously I can hear the other sounds and the effects of things going on overseas that I never thought I'd be able, I never thought I'd have that experience, but it's definitely something that I still have with me.
What are some of the life lessons you've learned from the military, if any?
Oh gosh. One of the life lessons, something that I learned, and I would say that's something that I think my father tried to tell me, and it's not that I didn't believe him, but I don't know, I wanted evidence, whatever. And that was, before I left, I remember him saying something along the lines of, hey, you're going to be going to basic training. Just remember that everybody can do something. Everybody has some value to them, type of thing. Didn't really think much of it until you get into basic training. And it's like, just amazed at some of the people that, on one occasion they might frustrate you so much that you want to hit them almost. And then some event or something would happen where it's like the drill sergeants are telling you to do this, and that same individual was like, hey guys, I did this for 2 years before I joined the Army. This is exactly what we need to do, type of thing, And I think I always kind of carried that with me, that even somebody who on first instance or whatever might seem like this person is of no value to this group or this project or whatever, that they likely have some type of life experience or something that they're there for a reason. They have a value. They have something that can be utilized. And I think in our unit, overseas, it's like you were constantly having to do all these on-the-ground repairs and oddball jobs and tasks. So a lot of these people who were from, the rural environments, farmland, those types of individuals, I think in some ways they were better suited because they were used to having to adapt and overcome to stuff and make changes. If something broke on a vehicle, they figured out some way to fix it. And it's like you don't always have a flat tire or something in the field. Like, we blew out a valve stem and it got fixed with various bubble gum that we put together and was enough to hold it to get back to a base. Little things like that, and then you think, oh, I don't even know how to do something that I need to do. And somebody would just come up with a random idea like, hey guys, let's do this. Oh, hey, that'll work perfectly for this type of thing. So that was a big life lesson, is that, and again, those people, aside from the officers, the majority of the enlisted weren't people that typically had a strong education background or a college background. They were people that were, again, either coming from a job or straight out of high school, whatever. So to get them all together and see that function and coalesce together and work and all those different ideas being shared, I don't know, it was just that was just an overall great experience. And at the same time, along that same vein, the differences in diversity and this country, as a kid in high school and joining the military, even though I had traveled around to some different states, it's not like you get to live in those states for months on end and really get to interact with all these different people. So to be in basic training and then a unit, and you've got friends who are, Hispanic descent, African American, all these different groups that are all there together that you traditionally wouldn't have interacted with, that was a whole different perspective on everything. And you were really immersed into all the different cultures of America, all these different groups that are here, and what makes this country, I think, so strong. It's like just seeing all that, even though I kind of knew that, yeah, you're going to be serving with all these different people, but it's different when you're actually serving with all those different people, and then you go out together, for dinner, and just different little cultural things that people learned, or, my mom told me never to do this or whatever, and my family does this, and then, we'd all get together and you'd have cookouts and things, and then to experience some of the people who were, from Louisiana with all this crazy Cajun cooking and stuff that they'd bring in, you'd be like, whoa, what is this? But they'd be saying the same thing to something, you would do or whatever. And it was just really interesting to have all that together and working in one area, and just, it's not like it was being forced upon us or anything. It's just like you experienced all this and made it work and happen, and it was, I don't know, it's just a good experience.
Okay. Good military experience. Had some life-changing factors there. You come to Wright State. You've graduated. Now what do you do?
So while I was here at Wright State doing my undergrad, which was in geography, I was a student worker in the Veterans Affairs office on campus, which helped veteran students process GI Bill benefits. And that was a good role to be in. I really felt like I was helping veterans, and I was getting paid to do that, and do my schooling. So it was an added bonus. I was also a teaching assistant at that point in time for a computer science course that was going on here on campus. So I was doing kind of multiple things here, and the VA office, that position at that point in time was inside the registrar's office on campus. So I got a little bit of interaction with typical things that go on in a registrar's office on campus. So I graduated, and initially I didn't, at that point in time, that was kind of when the big crash happened. There wasn't a lot of jobs, a lot of openings, anything. It was kind of like, oh crap, what am I going to do now? And there was a job that opened up in the registrar's office involving transfer work. And so I was just kind of like, well, if I take that, I can do it. And if I really don't like it, I can start doing a master's program or something while I'm employed there, and it'll be good. But I took that role, and in taking that position, that allowed me to see certain things that had kind of, I hate to use the term adversely affected me, but it kind of bothered me when I was doing my undergrad. So, things where military training that I had done and completed weren't being applied into the college level, if you will. My military credit essentially applying had those issues, and that was always kind of in the back of my head. Like, I had that experience as an undergrad overall. So taking on this position, part of what I realized was, hey, I can be an advocate for veterans now because I'm the person who handles all this transfer work. Here at the institution, if I want to get this military stuff evaluated, I can actually just ask faculty members or departments, hey, are you willing to give credit for this or align this to this training or whatever the case may be? And as soon as I started doing that and started seeing benefits to students who could graduate faster because of that or save their GI Bill, that kind of got me hooked into thinking, oh, hey, this is actually a really nice job because you're helping all these vets. And it was helping regular students too, but obviously the vets have that special place in your heart because you have that shared experience with them. So helping everybody. And while I was doing that, I also started my master's program here in Earth and Environmental Science and completed that. And about the time I completed that program, the state of Ohio as a whole was kind of moving towards creating legislation around requiring all of our public institutions in the state to accept and use military credit. So I started getting involved in that process from the right state point of view. And then once that legislation passed, the state of Ohio, the Ohio Department of Higher Education, kind of realized now that we have this passed and here on the books, we got to figure out how to implement it, and we need somebody to be able to manage it and kind of oversee that. So I think because of a lot of the legwork, the groundwork that I had done and laid here at Wright State, I think I had, hopefully it's safe to say, a decent reputation that I can do some of this work. So much so that they basically said, hey, we're creating this position, we need somebody with this experience, are you willing to apply for it and do this? And so I kind of thought to myself, if I really wanted to do that, because even now, it's a far commute. I still live here in the Dayton area in Beaver Creek, so that position is located in Columbus, Ohio. So it's about an hour and 10-minute commute, and I applied and got accepted into that role. So now I've been trying to work essentially at the state level to do similar work to get instead of just faculty at the institution, faculty panels that we have made up of institutions around the state to sign off on certain military coursework that can transfer. And now when that gets signed off on, it essentially becomes automatic around the state when that student shows up to an institution. So in some cases now, if they show up with certain training, they can submit their military transcript to a school, and some of those courses are now automatically evaluated around the entire state. So that can automatically appear on their transcript. There are still issues and problems, and that is kind of the best case scenario, when they come in with a specific course that the state's endorsed. But then it's just nice to have that done behind the scenes, because now that student, that veteran or current service member does not have to do the legwork of talking with advisors and faculty about how to evaluate this and stuff. It's already done. And hopefully more of them realize the benefits of some of that, because there's been a lot of work involved in that process. and a lot of training for the faculty to really understand all that.
Thank you so much for your current job and your work with veterans, and for taking the time to do this interview. Is there anything that you feel we haven't discussed or should be added?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I guess I'll I'll go back a little bit to deployment. And what I mean by this, and I kind of want to inspire other vets, because one of the questions, and it's kind of the stereotypical thing that we always get, is the one that you were already asking: how hot was it over there? But the other one is always that question: oh, the civilian question, did you get to kill anybody? Or you tell them, I deployed to Afghanistan, and their reaction is, oh, I can't even imagine what that's like. And I think a lot of veterans, you sort of shut down when somebody asks that, or says, I can't imagine what that's like. And I think we owe it to ourselves as a community to take the next step and really try to turn that back on them and say, well, I need you to understand what that's like. I think we've got such a small community in the nation. They always say it's less than 1% that's serving. By the time the World War II, Korea, Vietnam, that generation is all, they're leaving us at a very quick rate. Pretty soon there's going to be not that many veterans around the country overall, and I think we owe it to ourselves as a community to take that and make the average civilian a little bit more empathetic with us. They think, oh, how can you be willing to sacrifice yourself for somebody else that you've served with? I mean, I would have put myself in harm's way for anybody in my unit at that point in time. And I think for them, it's like, well, it's no different than you being a mother or a father of a small kid. If something's going to happen, you're probably going to, if there's a bus coming, you're going to jump in front of that thing so that your kid is the same kind of thing. Just trying to tie that into something that they can relate to, instead of just saying, oh, I served in Afghanistan, oh, I can't imagine what that was like, and you're just sort of like, yeah, and just walk off. Take some time and talk with them and involve, like, this is what's going on. This isn't just a war that's happening on, CNN. Like, this is the average Joe. Your next door neighbor could be a combat veteran, who knows, with some award for valor, and you have no idea. Like, go talk with them, understand, like, this is their sacrifice, their story. Be willing to sort of talk about it and share those human elements. Bring it out, like just some item from your deployment or something that you want to mention and talk about that you had an experience with, whether it be good or bad or whatever. Share that with them, because they don't know. If they don't have a family member or a close friend or whatever who served, they often have no clue what it takes and what was involved. And it's just, don't be afraid to share your story, I guess, is what it would come down to. So, when people ask me those types of questions, I'll often get into kind of nitty-gritty details about things that went on overseas that I've kind of left out of this interview overall, to sort of use that as a little bit of a gentle smack of reality of saying, hey, I wasn't anything special overseas. I was just the average Joe artillery guy on an artillery crew in the middle of Afghanistan. It wasn't like I was some general somewhere in the Pentagon. And this was my experience, and I know thousands upon thousands of other people had similar experiences. So get out there and talk with them and understand what it takes, and know that when some congressman, senator, president, whomever says that we want to have military action somewhere, like, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes along with that. It's not just a snap your thing and all these guys show up. I mean, yeah, that happens, but then you've got all these after effects that we're seeing now with PTSD and TBI and all these things that are happening because of that war, let alone things that might come forward later with burn pits and things that the veterans are having to register with the VA. Like, that's the cost of war. And civilians, I think often don't realize all that's there. It's real easy to say, this country has ticked us off, let's go bomb them. But it's like, yeah, we can go do that, but understand there's a big cost and a lot tied to that. So, I think that's, I guess, the last thing is just sharing. Like, don't be afraid to share your story and tell people what you've done, because they need to know. We need to get that out there.
Yes, record with veterans.
Yes, and record with projects like this so that people can know, so that hopefully some civilians who don't have the experience can watch some of these videos and things and realize, oh my God, like this happened or whatever. the situation was. So I'll
Okay.
just leave it.
So I think you kind of answered my final question, but I have to ask it anyway.
Mhm.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear this interview?
Man. That is a tough one. I guess I would, again, I'd kind of touch back on what I just said about, don't be afraid, as vets, don't be afraid to share your story. But at the same time, too, if you're a civilian or a family member, and especially as generations go on, don't be afraid to ask, your mother or your father, if they served, ask them what they did, learn about it. And even if they're a combat vet and they don't want to talk about the combat, keep finding ways to talk about that and nudge them and get them a little bit more comfortable with it. Because I think a lot of times, some of those situations, if they did see really bad combat, they need somebody to talk to and vent and have that release. And it's often in the form of other veterans. I mean, that's why you typically have your VFW and posts and whatnot where people go, or various different vets getting together just to shoot the breeze type of thing. But again, the regular civilian population needs to know what's going on, and I think there's value within your own family units of just knowing what's going on. Like, I kick myself now for not talking to my grandfather more about what he did in World War II, and even though he did talk about it quite a bit, it's like I heard it all, but I wasn't writing it down. I wasn't recording it. It's like I wish I had those experiences that he was saying to pass on to even my kids or their grandkids, just to have this documented somewhere. Which is also another reason I really need to start writing memoirs about what I want to do, because I want to document that all. Because again, I want people to realize, just because somebody's a vet doesn't mean you can't approach them and ask them questions. But at the same time, don't feel like they have to give you an answer. If they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. That's totally their right, their prerogative. But again, just don't be afraid to ask them questions. Say, hey, what was that like? Try not to use the term, I can't imagine what that was like. Say, what was that like? Tell me about it. I want to know, like, what happened? That type of thing. So I guess that's what I would leave them, is don't be afraid to ask those questions, and try to be empathetic with them and what was going on at the time, that whoever it is they're looking at, or whatever served. So.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We are concluding the interview with Jared Shank.